Look at her, Ethan sneered, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Can you believe this is the same woman I married? What a waste. The laughter that followed was sharp, stabbing into me like tiny knives. His friends leaned back in their chairs, grinning, drinking, feeding off his cruelty. I tried to steady the tray in my hands, but before I could set it down, his foot slammed into my leg. The sting shot through me. I stumbled, nearly falling. The wine glasses rattled. Then, as if the kick wasn't enough, he grabbed a glass of water and poured it over my head. Ice cold, it slid down my face, soaking my blouse, clinging to my skin. The room erupted with laughter. I stood there frozen, water dripping, my cheeks burning. I couldn't even look up. My children were asleep upstairs. What if they had seen this? What if they had heard? For a moment, I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. But instead, I just stood still, silent. Something in me broke that night, but something else woke up too. Because if they thought I would stay weak forever, they were wrong. How does a woman who gave everything end up humiliated like this? And more importantly, how does she rise again? If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, back to the story. I wasn't always the woman you saw standing silent while strangers laughed at me. I used to be Naomi Carter, a girl with her whole life ahead of her, with a father who raised me to believe I was stronger than the world would ever give me credit for. My father was everything to me. He wasn't just a parent, he was a teacher, a mentor, a compass. He taught me how to read numbers on a balance sheet before I could even drive a car. He used to say, Naomi, money is only a tool. People forget that. What matters is how you use it, what you build with it. I held on to that. He didn't spoil me, though he could have. He didn't raise me to be careless with the wealth I was born into. Instead, he raised me to understand responsibility, to know that resilience is worth more than comfort. When he died, the world felt like it caved in. I was only 21. I remember standing at his funeral, surrounded by suits and flowers, but feeling completely alone. That was the first time I realized that no amount of money could buy you back the people who mattered most. With his passing, I inherited everything he had built. A fortune, yes, but also a name. And a lesson, stay humble, because life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. I lived quietly. I wasn't the type to throw parties or chase headlines. I wanted something real, something of my own. And then I met Ethan Miller. Ethan was nothing like the men I grew up around. He didn't wear polished shoes or tailored suits. He didn't come from money, and he didn't pretend to. He was rough around the edges, with a kind of hungry energy that pulled me in. His eyes were alive, sharp, restless, like someone carrying both a dream and the weight of the world at the same time. The first time we spoke, he made me laugh, not the polite laugh I gave at charity events, but the kind that shook something loose inside me. He was different, I told myself. Real. He didn't care about the Carter name, or at least, he made me believe he didn't. He cared about building something for himself. He used to tell me, Naomi, I know I'm not the kind of man people expect you to be with, but if I had just one shot, I could give you a life that's more than just money. I could give you a dream. And I believed him. Everyone warned me. My mother, my friends, even family I barely spoke to. They all said the same thing, be careful. He's after your money. But love doesn't listen to warnings, does it? Love sees what it wants to see, and I saw a man who wasn't afraid to chase something bigger than himself. So when he asked me to marry him, I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about what I stood to lose. I thought about what we could gain. I thought about love being enough. Our first home was nothing like the mansion I had grown up in. It was small, noisy, with peeling paint and leaky faucets. But it was ours. And in those first years, I was happy. Genuinely happy. We didn't need luxury. We had each other. We had dreams. Ethan would sit beside me on the floor of that tiny apartment, holding my hand and whisper, "One day, Naomi, I'll give you the world." And I believed him. The idea for his company came late one night. He was pacing the room, running his hands through his hair, frustrated that no one would take him seriously. "No bank will give me a loan. No investor will even look at me," he said, his voice tight with anger. "They all think I'm nothing." I sat on the couch, watching him unravel, and something inside me tightened. I remembered my father's words about money being a tool, and I heard myself say, "What if I invested in you?" He stopped mid-step. "Naomi, you can't mean that." "Why not?" I asked. "I believe in you. I believe in what you're capable of. Let me do this, for us." He looked at me like I was offering him the world, and in a way I was. So I did it. I moved funds, signed papers, and handed him the chance no one else would give him. I watched his face light up as he walked into his first office space, his first meeting, his first moment of being more than just a man with a dream. And I was proud. So proud. When I found out I was pregnant, it felt like life had given us a double blessing, a baby and a business beginning to bloom. I thought it was perfect timing. But pregnancy is no easy journey. The exhaustion, the cravings, the swollen ankles, I gave everything to carrying that child. And one evening, Ethan came to me and said, "Naomi, I'll handle the company. You focus on the baby." At the time, it sounded like love. It sounded like care. And maybe part of it was. I agreed. I stepped back. I told myself this was balance. He would build outside the home, and I would build inside it. But there was one thing I didn't tell him. When I handed him control, I didn't hand him ownership. Not legally. The company was still in my name. Maybe it was my father's voice in my ear, or maybe it was just instinct. I couldn't explain it then, but deep down I knew to keep that safety net. Still, I walked away from the boardroom, the meetings, the late-night strategy calls, and I chose the nursery instead. I traded business suits for nursing gowns, contracts for bedtime stories. My days became filled with bottles, diapers, lullabies, and I was content, for a while. But here's the truth. Love changes when sacrifice isn't seen, when it isn't valued. I gave him everything. My inheritance, my trust, my support. I gave him a company to build his name on. I gave him children, a family, a home. I thought he would see me as his partner, his equal. But what happens when the very things you give out of love become the reasons you're disrespected? What happens when the man you trusted with your life begins to see you as less than the woman he fell in love with? That's where my story turns. And if you stay with me, you'll see just how quickly love can twist into something darker. Tell me, would you still call it love if it costs you your dignity? At first, I thought success would bring us closer. When Ethan's company started to grow, I was proud of him, proud of us. I told myself the late nights at the office were proof of his dedication, the endless meetings a sign of his hunger. But little by little, I started to notice a shift. It began with small things. The way he stopped holding my hand in public. The way his suits changed from the cheap ones I used to iron for him, to designer brands he never let me touch. The way he corrected my grammar in front of strangers, even though he used to tell me he loved my simple way of speaking. And then came the looks. When I walked into a room, his eyes didn't light up anymore. They scanned me, like a critic judging a piece of art. Too soft, too round, too ordinary. After I had our first child, my body was different. After our second, it was even harder to get back into shape. I carried the weight proudly at first. These were the marks of motherhood, proof of my sacrifices. But to Ethan, they became weapons. "Naomi," he said one morning as he buttoned his crisp white shirt, "you've let yourself go." I froze with the baby in my arms. "Excuse me?" He didn't even look at me. "Look at you. You're heavier. You don't even try to look attractive anymore." I laughed nervously, thinking it was a cruel joke. "I just had a baby, Ethan. What do you expect?" He turned then, his face sharp, cold. "I expect a wife who cares. Do you know how many women would kill to be with me now? And look at what I come home to." That was the first time he made me feel like less than a woman. It wasn't the last. The company flourished. Our mansion grew bigger. The cars outside multiplied. His wardrobe looked like something out of a celebrity's closet. But with every new piece of success, I lost another piece of my husband. At parties, I stood at his side like a shadow. He didn't even bother to hide the way his eyes followed younger women with flat stomachs and flawless skin. Sometimes he would flirt with them right in front of me. "Ethan," I whispered once at a gala, as he placed his hand a little too low on a secretary's back. He smirked. "Relax, Naomi. I'm just being friendly. Don't embarrass me." Don't embarrass him. As if I were the one bringing shame. The jokes came next. At board dinners, when his colleagues sat around, glasses clinking, laughter rising, he'd use me as his punchline. "Naomi wanted to help me with numbers once," he said, grinning at his friends. "She got so confused I thought she'd break the calculator. Leave the business to me, sweetheart. You just stick to, well, whatever it is you do." They all laughed. Even I laughed, because what else could I do? But inside, something shattered. And still, I told myself to endure. For the kids. For the vows. For the man I once knew. But the man I once knew was gone. At home, he was no better. He never joined family dinners. He never tucked the kids into bed. His laughter belonged to his friends. His affection to mistresses. His respect to strangers. I became invisible in my own home. Until the night I stopped being invisible. It was a dinner, one Ethan insisted on hosting. His brothers, as he called them, were sprawled across the dining room, cigars in hand, bottles of whiskey open, the table heavy with food I had personally instructed the staff to prepare. I walked in quietly, carrying a fresh tray. I placed it in front of Ethan, hoping maybe he'd notice the effort. Instead, he sneered. "Naomi," he said loudly, so everyone could hear, "why are you always in the way?" His friends chuckled. My cheeks burned. "I'm just serving dinner," I said softly. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing on me like I was a stranger. Then, in front of everyone, he kicked my leg under the table. Not hard enough to break, but sharp enough to make me stumble. The tray almost fell. The room roared with laughter. "Clumsy as always," Ethan announced. I steadied myself, my heart pounding. But before I could move, he grabbed a glass of cold water, lifted it high, and, without hesitation, poured it over my head. The liquid ran down my face, into my blouse, soaking me as gasps and laughter filled the room. For a moment, time stopped. I stood frozen, my hair dripping, my dignity drowning in that glass. Ethan smiled, basking in the approval of his friends. "See, gentlemen? This is what I live with." And they laughed again. But inside me, something broke. Or maybe something woke up. I remember gripping the edge of the table, shaking, humiliated, staring at the man I once gave everything to. And I thought to myself, is this really the end of me? Or is this just the beginning? Tell me. If you were me, what would you have done in that moment? That night, after everyone left, the house was quiet, too quiet. I stood in the bathroom staring at myself in the mirror. My hair was still damp from where Ethan had poured the water on me. My blouse clung to my skin, stained with humiliation. I should have shouted. I should have thrown the glass back at him. I should have walked out in anger. But instead, I cried. Not the loud, messy kind of crying. Just silent tears sliding down my cheeks as I pressed my hand against my mouth, careful not to wake the kids. I didn't want them to hear me breaking. For the first time in years, I didn't feel angry at Ethan. I didn't even feel shocked. I just felt done. That was my breaking point. I had spent so long holding on to a version of him that no longer existed. The boy who once held my hand under the stars, swearing he would never hurt me. The man who once kissed my forehead before every meeting, promising me we were building a future together. That man had died somewhere along the way, replaced by a stranger who found joy in my pain. And me? I had disappeared. I wasn't Naomi Carter anymore. I was just his wife, his joke, his servant, his punching bag. But staring at my reflection that night, eyes swollen, cheeks wet, I saw something flicker inside me. Something I thought I had lost. Clarity. I sat down at my vanity, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in years. My father's handwriting stared back at me from the top page, his neat signature, the ink still sharp despite the passing time. My father. The man who taught me that love should never make you small. The man who raised me to be strong, even when the world tried to weaken me. Before he died, he left me not just money, but wisdom. Naomi, he had told me once, his hand firm on mine, never give away all your power, not to anyone, not even someone you love. Keep a piece of yourself that is yours alone. And I had listened. When Ethan begged me to invest in his business, I did. When he asked me to let him handle the company while I stayed home with the children, I agreed. But what Ethan never knew, what no one knew, was that I never transferred full ownership to him. Every paper, every signature, every document still carried my name at the very top. Naomi Carter, not Ethan Miller. The mansion he bragged about, mine. The cars he flaunted, mine. The company he paraded as his success, legally mine. He had been building his arrogance on a foundation that was never his to claim. And suddenly, the humiliation I had suffered at dinner shifted in my chest. My tears dried, my breath steadied, my heart, which had felt so weak, began to beat with something new. Power. I looked at my sleeping children that night, their small bodies curled beneath their blankets, faces peaceful, untouched by the storm swirling in our home. They were my anchor, my reason. I whispered a promise to them in the dark. Mommy's going to fix this. Mommy's going to protect you. And that was when I began to plan. The next morning, I called an old number I hadn't dialed in years. "Hello? Mr. Harris," I said quietly. My voice trembled at first, but I forced strength into it. "It's Naomi Carter. I need your help." There was a pause, then a soft exhale. "Naomi, I wondered when you would call." Mr. Harris had been my father's lawyer. Discreet, sharp, and loyal to our family. If there was anyone I could trust, it was him. We met in his office later that week. I wore plain clothes, kept my head down, avoiding the curious eyes of the world that only knew me as Ethan's wife. But when I stepped into Harris's office, I felt a little taller. I laid everything on the table: bank statements, property deeds, shares, contracts. I had kept every single document safe all these years. And as Harris flipped through them, his brows lifted higher and higher. "Naomi," he finally said, his voice filled with quiet awe, "he doesn't own a thing. It's all yours." I nodded, my lips tight. "And I want it to stay that way." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "What do you want me to do?" "Prepare for divorce," I said firmly. "But no one can know, not yet. Especially not Ethan." For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was steering the wheel of my own life again. At home, I played my role carefully. I still cooked, still smiled when Ethan's friends came around, still endured his mocking words. But behind closed doors, I was gathering strength. Harris and I worked quietly, filing papers, securing assets, arranging custody for the children. Every night after Ethan fell asleep, I went to my study, sorting through documents, signing where Harris instructed, building my future brick by brick. I protected my children first. Their education funds were locked away in trusts only I could touch. Their future, unlike mine, would never depend on anyone's mercy. And as I moved through each step, I felt my father's presence again, like he was standing behind me, nodding in approval. "Good girl," I imagined him saying. "You're finally remembering who you are." But even as my plan took shape, a question haunted me. When the time came, when the truth exploded and Ethan realized he had nothing, no mansion, no cars, no company, only the ashes of his arrogance, would I be strong enough to face him, or would the years of pain pull me back into silence? The papers were heavy in my hands, though they were only a few sheets of paper. Divorce papers. My freedom printed in black and white. I didn't plan to give them to him quietly, not after everything, not after he kicked me in front of his friends like I was nothing. No, this time everyone would see. It was another one of his nights, the kind of party where the wine flowed like water, laughter filled every corner of the mansion, and I was expected to play the invisible hostess. Ethan had invited his usual circle of friends, men who loved to bask in his so-called success, women who adored the shine of money more than the man behind it. I wore a simple black dress, not flashy, not loud, just enough to blend in, but my heart thundered beneath the fabric as I walked into the center of the living room, the papers hidden in a cream envelope. Ethan was in the middle of telling a story, one arm slung around a woman who wasn't me. His friends laughed like obedient dogs at every word he spat out. When he finally noticed me standing there, his eyes narrowed. "What is it now, Naomi?" he drawled, irritation dripping from his tone. I took a deep breath. My hand tightened around the envelope. "Ethan Miller," I said clearly, my voice slicing through the noise. "You've been served." I held out the envelope and let it drop into his lap. The room went silent. Gasps echoed. Someone dropped their glass. A woman covered her mouth with her hand. His friends stared at me like I had just set the mansion on fire. Ethan's face turned red, then pale. He ripped the envelope open, scanning the first page, his jaw tightening with every line. His hand shook as he looked up at me. "You," he stammered, his voice breaking with disbelief. "You're divorcing me?" I didn't flinch. "Yes. And this time, Ethan, everyone will see the truth." The next morning, the boardroom smelled of polished wood and expensive cologne. Ethan walked in as though nothing had changed, his arrogance still intact, though his eyes were shadowed with unease. He didn't know what was waiting for him. I was already seated at the long table with two of my lawyers by my side. The board members shifted in their chairs, whispering as Ethan strutted in. He shot me a glare. "What is she doing here?" he barked. One of the senior members cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carter requested this meeting. We agreed it was necessary." Ethan scoffed. "Mrs. Carter? She's nothing here. This company is mine." That was when I placed a thick folder on the table. Deeds, contracts, ownership papers, all bearing my name. I slid them across the polished surface, watching his face crumble as he flipped through page after page. "Legally," I said calmly, "this company has always been mine. I invested the money. I retained majority ownership. Ethan, you've been parading as CEO, but you've never had control." The board members leaned in, murmuring among themselves. Ethan slammed the folder shut. "This is ridiculous. You can't just walk in here and—" "Yes, I can," I cut him off, my voice sharper than his. "I'm the owner, and I'm taking back what belongs to me." The lawyers nodded. "Effective immediately, Mr. Miller is removed from his position. Mrs. Carter will now resume full control of the company." For the first time in years, Ethan was speechless. His mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted from one board member to another, searching for support, but none of them dared meet his gaze. The same men who once laughed at his cruel jokes now avoided him, suddenly loyal to the real power in the room. As security walked him out, I caught the way his fists clenched, his shoulders stiff. He looked back at me with pure hatred, but I didn't look away. The mansion was next. He strutted in late one evening, drunk and angry, only to find the locks changed and his belongings, packed neatly in boxes at the front gate. He pounded on the door, shouting my name, shouting threats, curses, promises he never intended to keep. I stood at the top of the stairs, my children clinging to my sides, watching quietly as the security guards told him he no longer lived there. "This is my house!" he screamed. "No," I whispered, though he couldn't hear me from where I stood. "It never was." The cars followed, the accounts, every luxury he once boasted about disappeared from his hands overnight. And then came the public downfall. At first, Ethan tried to save face. He went out with his friends, laughed louder than before, pretended the divorce was my loss. But the papers caught the truth. Photos of him with mistresses filled the tabloids. Articles exposed his affairs, his arrogance, his cruelty. Reporters dug into the company's records and found what I wanted them to see: the empire had always belonged to me. The same friends who once cheered him on began to vanish. Invitations stopped coming. Phone calls went unanswered. He was no longer the man to envy, he was the man to avoid. One night, I heard from an old acquaintance that he had been spotted at a cheap bar, drinking alone, his suit wrinkled, his face hollow. The mighty Ethan Miller reduced to nothing more than a shadow of himself. And strangely, I didn't feel joy. Not yet. What I felt was relief relief that my children were safe, relief that I had finally taken back what was mine, relief that the world could finally see who Ethan truly was. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't finished, because men like Ethan don't fall quietly, and as much as I had taken everything from him, his company, his mansion, his so-called friends, I knew in my heart he would try to strike back. The question was, when he did, would I be ready? When the dust finally settled, the silence felt strange. No more late-night arguments. No more humiliation in front of strangers. No more pretending everything was fine. For the first time in years, the house felt like home again. My children laughed freely without fear of Ethan's temper cutting their joy short. Their footsteps echoed through the halls, filling the mansion with the kind of warmth money could never buy. And me? I began to heal. At first, I didn't even know how to start. I had spent so many years living in his shadow that I had forgotten who I was. I stood in front of the mirror some mornings and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. Tired eyes, extra weight. But beneath it all, strength I hadn't noticed before. So I took it one step at a time. I returned to the company, not as the silent partner behind the scenes, but as the leader my father always believed I could be. The board respected me. The employees, once loyal to Ethan, quickly saw the difference in how I treated them, with fairness, with dignity. I started small charity projects too, helping women who had been through what I went through, giving scholarships to young girls with big dreams. Every time I stood on a stage to speak, I felt my father's presence again. I felt alive again. Slowly, I rebuilt myself. Not the woman Ethan wanted me to be, not the perfect wife who stayed quiet, but the woman I was born to be. Months later, the inevitable happened. I was in the garden, trimming roses, when I heard the sound of hesitant footsteps behind me. I turned, and there he was, Ethan, but he wasn't the man I remembered. His once perfect suits were worn, his hair was messy, his face carried lines of exhaustion, the arrogance in his eyes had vanished, replaced by something I never thought I'd see in him. Desperation. "Naomi," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, I need to talk to you." I set the shears down, my heart calm. I didn't rush to speak. I didn't rush to comfort him. I simply looked at him, the father of my children, the man I had once loved deeply, the man who had destroyed that love with his own hands. "I lost everything," he said, his voice trembling. "The house, the company, my friends. I lost me. Naomi, please, I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you. But can we start again? Can you forgive me?" For a moment, silence hung between us. I thought of the years I had wasted, the tears I had shed, the humiliation I had endured, and then I thought of my children, sleeping peacefully at night without fear. I thought of the company thriving under my leadership. I thought of myself, stronger than I had ever been. I stepped closer, my voice steady. "Ethan, you didn't just lose me. You lost the family that loved you. You lost the empire I built. You lost the respect you threw away with your own hands." His eyes glistened with tears. "Naomi, please." But I shook my head. Forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It means moving on, and I've already moved on. And with that, I turned and walked away. I didn't look back, not once. The closing chapter of my story wasn't about him, it was about me. I stood tall in the company lobby weeks later, dressed in a navy suit that fit me perfectly, my hair pulled back, my children holding my hands. Cameras flashed as we walked through the glass doors. People whispered my name, not as Ethan's wife, but as Naomi Carter, the woman who built an empire and took it back. I glanced at my children. They were smiling. They weren't ashamed of me. They were proud. And for the first time in a very long time, I was proud too. The same woman who once stood humiliated, drenched in cold water while strangers laughed, now walked untouchable. Dignified. Whole. And if my story teaches you anything, let it be this. Never underestimate your own worth. Love blindly, and you may lose yourself. Love wisely, and you'll never be destroyed. And remember, revenge is best served with dignity and silence. It cuts deeper than rage ever could. So tell me, If you were me, would you have walked away that day too, or would you have given him one last chance? Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out.